Welcome to video 9 in Module 223 Advanced Ethics. This video is dedicated to 3 cases, and I want you to use all of the principles that we've learned so far as you consider these cases. Here are 3 important tips that you'll want as you go through them. First is use an analytical process rather than an intuitive one. Don't rely on intuition at all. Instead, it's better to be very deliberate. Put your notes beside you and treat them like a checklist as you're going through the cases. And don't worry that it's slow at first. It will be. But as you get practiced, it'll start to get faster and faster. Number 2, avoid any assumptions. And in particular, one assumption that people often make is the idea that something feels really offensive to them, and therefore they equate that to the idea that there must be multiple principles violated. But it just doesn't work that way. Somebody might violate just one principle, but do it in a way that's really strikingly egregious. And another person might violate 3 principles, but not have done something that seems or feels as bad. It doesn't equate, so don't make that assumption. And finally, make sure that you can explain the reasoning behind your processes. Explain clearly how you achieved these conclusions by looking at specific elements in the cases or evidence. Point to them, and don't go with things that feel or seem like they are right. So don't guess. Instead, when you come to pieces of information that seem unclear or are simply absent, make a note of the things that you wish you knew and that might have changed the outcome. Because sometimes that happens in real life. In some cases, we can say, yes, it was a violation, or in other cases, a no. But there are going to be situations in the middle where it depends on further information being sought. And so I would like you to describe anything that you would like to know that wasn't outlined in the case. Okay, so let's take a look at the cases. In case number 1, a staff person named Sela was convicted of driving while under the influence of alcohol when she was off work. She wasn't with any people that were supported individuals, and she wasn't driving one of the vehicles owned by the program. She knows, however, that her criminal record check will now show this, will show that she has a criminal offense. But she also knows that her employer won't ask for a new copy for 4 more years, and she knows that she can probably get away with working without telling anybody about it, so she keeps it to herself. Scenario 2. A staff person named Misty has a father with a different last name, and he works as a realtor. He's trying to sell the family's summer cottage to Misty's employer. Misty hasn't let her employer know that she will profit from the deal, and the employer would not know it if she doesn't tell her. Marshall was with Preet, and Preet is a supported person, and Marshall is the staff person. Preet bought a package of hockey cards. Preet offered to trade a card for one that Marshall had. He didn't realize that the card he was trying to trade to Marshall was worth a lot more than the card he was asking for. Marshall, the staff person, said no. So your job is to think about what principles were violated. Along the way, you may even find examples of principles that were upheld. And remember, take note of any examples where you wish you had more behavior and where having more information, and where having that information might change how you see these cases. Let's get you to pause the video and start it back up when you think you have the answers. So how did you do in case 1? In this case, Sela was convicted of driving while under the influence, and she didn't let her employer know right away that her criminal record had changed. So this is a violation of the principle of accountability. Why? Because she hid this from her employer. She's supposed to let her employer know. And second, it's no longer current. Her criminal record check is supposed to be up to date, meaning it has to be accurate. Her criminal record check changed, so even though she's not going to be asked for it for 4 years, she doesn't have a current criminal record check, and so she's no longer upholding that principle. You might have noticed that there's a lot of things we didn't know. For example, you can't assume that the fact that she does not have, that she had driving under the influence away from work means that she's unsafe when she's at work. We don't know that she lost her license, or that she in some way lost the ability to do her job because of that. And we don't know if she went out and literally told lies to people about this. Maybe she simply just didn't tell people. All of those things might have made things different. If she had behaved unsafely, we could go with the safety principle. If she had lost her license, she would no longer be competent, and if she lied, she would be violating the principle of honesty and integrity. Let's take a look at the second case. In this case, you should have immediately seen that Misty is engaged in a conflict of interest. She should have told her employer that there was a way that she was going to gain from this transaction, or she should have told her father not to engage in the transaction. And the fact that she wasn't open about this also creates an accountability issue. She didn't go looking for the conflict of interest, so it wasn't enough for her to simply be quiet about it. That's an important thing to recognize here. Now, you'll notice that there's no violation of the law here. She did something that was going to be a big deal potentially for her employer, but it's not considered to be an illegal action. And I mention all of that because sometimes people automatically assume that this is some type of a theft. Thefts are always a violation of the law. And remember, conflict of interest and theft are different things. So it's also important for us to recognize something else we talked about very early in the module, that the law and ethics don't always catch the exact same things. Sometimes people do things that are both unethical and illegal, but it's also possible for people to do things that are one without being the other. In our last example, if Selah had gotten in trouble with the law for driving under the influence, but had been open with her employer about it and had, after all of that, found out she could continue to work, she wouldn't have been doing anything unethical, even though she'd violated the law. Here we have a situation where somebody violated their ethics, but didn't violate the law. Let's take a look at the third case. In the third case, you should have been able to see that Marshall violated no principles. As a staff person, he does not give away his own autonomy. He's allowed to say no to this trade with an individual, and in particular, he might have felt this was an even more important thing to do because he might have suspected that Preet didn't know what he was doing in terms of the value of these cards. So Marshall is not obligated to give something away for free or to engage in this trade just because it would be a way of empowering Preet. He instead upheld the ownership principle, and he made sure he didn't do anything that might conflict with Preet's gain, because Marshall recognized that if he made this trade, he might have had mixed emotions or mixed motivations. He might have been doing something that exploited Preet at the same time as he gained himself in some illicit way. And he didn't have to worry about telling the truth to anybody or hiding anything because he simply chose not to engage. What else could he have done? And this is an important thing for us as we transition into the other part of the course. It's not enough for us to think about what he didn't do, but also for us to think about what we should do when faced with ethical dilemmas. For example, in this case, he could have told Preet the value of the card. He could have helped Preet trade the card with somebody else, like a card store owner. And he could have told his supervisor that Preet has an especially valuable asset and done something to make sure it was kept safe. And by the way, he could have done all of those things and still done what he did in the case, which was not trade his own card. So we can always go a bit further. We can always approach the principles even beyond the level of being unethical. All right, how did you do? Let's talk about it in our next discussion session. If you're not getting it and you're feeling uncomfortable, by all means, reach out and I'll give you some other scenarios to consider and we'll talk through any things that are unclear.